The train hissed like a wounded animal, steam curling into the cold Utah morning, rising in desperate spirals above the rust-colored cliffs of Moab. The platform was empty, save for one woman, her silhouette cut sharply against the red horizon. She stood still, her gloved hand clutching a battered leather bag, the other hidden inside the pocket of her coat fingers, wrapped tightly around a folded letter. The wind pulled at her shawl. Dust clung to her hem. But Eleanor Whitmore did not move. She had traveled 900 miles for a promise written in ink and sealed with hope. There were no banners, no brass band waiting. Just silence wide and staring like the town itself was holding its breath. Eleanor was 54. Not old by numbers, but in the eyes of men like Silas Monroe, she might as well have been a relic. The letter he wrote had been warm, tender. The words of a man who seemed to understand the loneliness of empty mornings and long winters. A man who said he didn't need perfection, just someone steady, kind, willing to share a roof, and maybe a few quiet joys. She had believed him. Sold her sewing machine, left the boarding house she ran, packed the few things she had left in this world, and came west. The letter felt like a second chance, like God was finally whispering it's not too late. But as she stepped down from the train, she saw no man in a tan duster, no rancher waiting with an outstretched hand. Just two saloons, a crooked church steeple, and faces half hidden behind windows watching. Then she heard a low cough and the crunch of boots on gravel. "Eleanor Whitmore," the voice asked. She turned, heart leaping. Silas Monroe was tall, sun-darkened, with a thick mustache and hard eyes. He looked her over slowly like a man inspecting a horse he hadn't meant to buy. "You ain't what I expected," he said. Her heart dropped. "You didn't ask for a picture. Figured you'd be younger." She swallowed. "You said you wanted someone steady, someone kind." He scoffed. "I said I wanted a wife, one that could give me sons, not someone past her bearing years." Something inside her cracked, and still she tried to find some shred of dignity to hold on to. "Silas," she said, voice trembling, "I came all this way because I thought your words meant something." His face hardened. "You're not what I need. I'll cover your fare back. That's decent enough." She stared at him. He turned and walked away. The platform was suddenly cruel in its silence. She was alone. Utterly, shamefully alone. Laughter drifted from the saloon. Not loud, but enough. Enough to prick at her pride like nettles. She stood there until the last tendrils of steam from the train disappeared. There was nowhere to go. Nothing to go back to. Her room had been rented. Her furniture sold. Her future, the one she had dared to imagine, had vanished with the look in that man's eyes. Hours later, Eleanor wandered the edge of town, boots dragging in the dust. Her bag grew heavier with every step. By sunset, she had found nothing but wind and emptiness. She sat on a boulder outside town, staring at the horizon. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Soft and slow. A man rode up from the canyon's edge, a lantern swinging from his saddle. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. Then, "You lost, ma'am." She rose, cautious. "Just looking for a place to sit." He nodded once. "Storm's coming. I got a cabin not far. Warm food, dry roof, no charge." She hesitated. "You have my word," he added, "just kindness." The man was lean, grizzled, his face marked with years and wind. There was something unreadable in his eyes, but he waited, hands steady on the reins. "Eleanor," she said finally. "Jude Carver." He extended a hand. She took it. That night, in a one-room cabin, warmed by rabbit stew and a crackling fire, Eleanor felt the first thread of warmth stitch itself back into her bones. Jude did not ask questions. He didn't offer pity. He poured her coffee and told her about the horses he kept, the fence he needed, fixing the book he never finished reading. not to impress her, just to fill the silence with something human. When she admitted what had happened, Silas the train, the humiliation, he didn't flinch. Then he was a fool, Jude said. It wasn't a compliment, it was just true. Eleanor didn't cry. She stared at the fire until the tears dried behind her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, something fragile and necessary began to mend. She had come west for a promise, and found instead the first embers of a different kind of redemption. Not in a letter, but in a man who saw her. And in the firelight she dared to begin again. Some stories don't begin with fireworks or fate. Some begin in silence with two strangers and a shared ache. Jude Carver was a man of routine. He rose with the sun, fed the horses, patched what needed patching, and let the rest be. His days passed like steady drumbeats, quiet, weathered, predictable. But after Eleanor arrived, something shifted. It wasn't loud, not even spoken aloud, but it lingered in the way he poured her coffee each morning, without asking how she took it, or in the way he left the better chair for her by the fire. Eleanor woke early on her third morning there. She'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, the kind of rest that only came after complete emotional collapse. The rabbit stew from the night before still lingered faintly in the air, but now the scent of fresh coffee replaced it. She stepped into the main room of the cabin and found Jude whittling a piece of cedar with focused patience. He looked up. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said. "I just needed the morning." He nodded. "There's eggs and bread, if you don't mind it hard." They ate in comfortable silence. Eleanor noticed how little clutter Jude kept, only what was needed. Yet his tools were well oiled, his books stacked neatly, and even the woodpile was perfectly aligned. This was a man who had survived grief not by forgetting, but by folding his pain into something structured. Later that day, Eleanor stepped outside. The air was cool but bright. She wandered behind the cabin and found a small overgrown garden plot. The soil was dry, the fencing broken, and weeds ran wild, but it had once been cared for. Jude found her there kneeling in the dirt, pulling crabgrass with bare fingers. "That was hers," he said. "My wife's, Hannah." Eleanor looked up but didn't speak. She loved lavender. Couldn't get it to grow worth a damn, but she tried. "Maybe it needs a second try," Eleanor said softly. They worked together in the afternoon light, Eleanor clearing Jude, hammering new stakes. At one point, Eleanor paused, wiping her brow with a handkerchief. She looked at Jude, really looked. The hard lines of his face, the sadness in his eyes, the tenderness buried under all that silence. Inside the cabin that evening, she found a small leather-bound book tucked in the shelf beside the hearth. It was Hannah's. A journal. Recipes, sketches, poems. Eleanor flipped to a page and read, "Love is not found. It is made day by day, word by word, hand by hand." That night, Eleanor read aloud from the journal as Jude stirred stew. He didn't say anything, but his hand paused slightly at the mention of Hannah's name, then continued. He didn't stop her. They sat by the fire close, but not touching. The wind outside howled like a morning song, but inside something calm began to take root. "I don't know what I'm doing," Eleanor admitted. "Neither do I," Jude said. "But you're here, and that's something." She looked at him. "Why did you bring me in that night you didn't know me?" He stared into the flames. "Because you looked like someone who wasn't done yet." Eleanor thought of all the years she'd spent being quiet, small proper. How every kindness was a currency, every glance a judgment. But here, beside a man who spoke little and listened deeply, she felt something she hadn't in decades: freedom. When Jude rose to stoke the fire, she reached for the cedar carving he'd been shaping. It was a small bird's wings, slightly lifted. She traced the lines with her finger. It's beautiful. It's unfinished, he said. She smiled. So am I. In that shared recognition, the wind didn't feel quite as sharp, and the fire seemed to burn a little brighter. Tomorrow they would plant lavender again. Sometimes danger doesn't come with guns blazing or threats shouted in the street. Sometimes it wears a smile, asks for shelter, and waits until your back is turned. The sky was slipping into amber when Jude and Eleanor returned from the hills, their arms sore from a full day repairing the fence that bordered his pasture. The work had been quiet but companionable. Two people moving in rhythm, each finding comfort in shared labor. They spoke little. Yet everything important had already been said in the past few days: the acknowledgement of pain, the acceptance of presence, the strange peace found in doing something simple together. As the last light of day folded behind the red cliffs, Jude was coiling rope beside the barn when he froze. Eleanor saw his shoulders stiffen. Then she heard it too, hoofbeats. Slow, uneven. A figure emerged from the dusty trail, silhouetted against the dying sun. The man on the horse slumped slightly, his coat damp with sweat, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. When he finally dismounted, he staggered a bit, then straightened. "Evening," he drawled. "Name's Barrett. Sorry to trouble you, but my horse went lame a few miles back. Been walking ever since." Jude didn't lower the fence tool in his hand. "That so, just looking for a roof for the night. Maybe a hot drink. I'll be gone at first light." Eleanor appeared at the cabin door, eyes sharp. Barrett noticed her and tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She didn't reply. Jude hesitated, then nodded once. "One night. You stay near the door." Barrett's grin returned. "You won't regret it." But Eleanor's stomach was already tight with unease. Inside, she offered him a cup of coffee without a word. He sat near the door as instructed, sipping slow, his eyes scanning the room, not in curiosity but calculation. He took in the rifle mounted above the hearth, the neat shelves, the worn boots by the wall. He was casing the place. "So," he said, nodding at the two of them, "you two kin?" "No," Jude said firm. "Could have fooled me." Barrett smirked. "Move around each other like you've done it for years." "We take care of ourselves," Eleanor replied coolly. Barrett let that hang for a moment. "Nice to see. Not many folks left who bother with decency," but his eyes betrayed the lie. They were alert, measuring, watching for weakness. That night, the air inside the cabin was heavy. Eleanor kept her revolver near, tucked beneath the quilt Jude had insisted she carry. Jude sat in his chair, closer to the rifle, eyes never leaving Barrett, who lay by the door, feigning sleep. But Eleanor knew. He wasn't sleeping. His breathing was too measured. His hand never strayed far from his belt. She rose early, long before dawn, and moved to the stove to make coffee. The fire had burned low, but hadn't gone out. Jude had stayed up tending it. Their eyes met, and she didn't need to speak. They both knew. Barrett stirred, stretched theatrically, and yawned. "Appreciate the shelter. You folks got any bread left?" "No breakfast," Jude said. "Storm's rolling in. You'd best be on your way." Barrett stood slow, his smile a touch more crooked than before. Sure. Just thought I'd warm up a bit first." Jude didn't blink. "You warmed enough." Eleanor stepped quietly toward the cabinet, positioning herself near the drawer where the extra ammunition was kept. She'd already slipped her hand in once that morning, checking. The revolver was loaded. Barrett's expression flickered. Then he saw it, how both of them were too calm, too ready. "You two always this jumpy?" he asked, stepping forward. "No," Jude said. "Just when a man shows up with no pack, no gear, no saddle marks on his coat, and a clean shirt after walking for miles." Barrett's grin fell. "Well, now sounds like you're accusing me of something." "I'm saying you're lying. Jude replied evenly. There was a beat of silence. Then Barrett moved. It wasn't fast, but it was practiced. He reached for the revolver at his hip, but Eleanor had already drawn hers. The hammer clicked back with the finality of thunder. "Don't," she said. Barrett froze, hand hovering. Jude rose slowly, rifle now in hand. "We don't want blood in this house, but we'll spill it if we have to." Barrett looked between them. "You don't look like killers." "You don't look like trouble," Eleanor said. "But here we are." He stepped back, hands raised, tension tightening every muscle. "I walk out, now you won't shoot me in the back. That depends on whether you try to come back," Jude said. "You show your face again, and I'll put you down like a rabid dog." Barrett muttered a curse and shoved the door open. He hesitated at the threshold, gave one last glance at Eleanor and smirked. "Shame. You're wasted here." Eleanor raised her chin. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The door slammed behind him, leaving only the wind and the echo of adrenaline. Jude lowered his rifle. Eleanor did the same. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't hide them. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, angry, but all right. He looked at her a moment, then said softly, "You were steady as stone." "I've been underestimated before," she said. "It gets tiring." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "He won't go far. Men like that circle back. Then we'll be ready." They didn't need to say more. Outside, the world was wide and unforgiving. But inside this cabin they had begun to form something hard to break, a quiet alliance, forged not from romance or desperation, but mutual respect and growing trust. The danger had passed, but a truth had settled. Sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that knock gently first. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've already survived the worst kind of strangers, the ones who promised love and left with your soul. That night, Eleanor sharpened the kitchen knives while Jude double-checked the locks. They didn't speak of fear, only of readiness. Because now they weren't just surviving. They were protecting something worth keeping. Not all homes are built with nails and timber. Some are built in silence and sacrifice in the tender grit of two people choosing to stay. The morning after the dance, Moab was washed clean by a light desert rain. The streets shimmered with dust, made smooth the air carried the scent of sage, and something else, something new. Eleanor stood by the window of Jude's cabin, watching the clouds part slowly across the sky. Her body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind earned from dancing, from standing her ground, from being alive in the fullest sense of the word. Jude came up beside her with a cup of coffee, his movements slow and quiet as ever. But there was something different in the way he stood next to her now, less distance, more gravity. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She held the mug between her hands. "I'm thinking I never expected to end up here. And I've never been more certain that it's exactly where I'm supposed to be." He nodded, not needing to speak. That had always been their way, truth spoken in glances, in small offerings of warmth, in doing rather than declaring. The weeks that followed were made of quiet industry. Eleanor opened a modest tea shop in a corner of town, renting the front half of an old leatherworks building. She painted the walls herself, scrubbed the floors until the wood breathed again, and filled the shelves with jars of herbs, dried lavender, and simple mugs. She named it Kindred, and the sign was hand-lettered by Jude. The shop became more than a place to drink tea. It was a haven. Widows came for quiet company. Children ran in after school for slices of lemon bread. Miners came on Sundays for something that didn't burn their throat. Eleanor told stories, gave advice, patched knees, and once removed a splinter so skillfully, a 6-year-old declared her a sorceress. She didn't try to impress. She simply was. Jude helped, when he could, fixing the leaky roof building shelves, staying late after closing, just to sit with her in the flickering light. They talked of small things, the best time to plant onions, the sound of coyotes, the way the moon tilted in different seasons. But beneath those words were layers of trust, of shared silence, of two people quietly choosing one another again and again. Sometimes Eleanor would look at him across the room and feel her chest swell, not with longing, but with recognition. This is what I waited for, she would think. Not a man to sweep me off my feet, but one who walks beside me every damn day through dust and dawn and doubt. One evening, as they mended fence posts by the pasture, Eleanor paused and said, "I think he'll come back." Jude didn't ask who. He knew, if he does, Jude said he won't find the same woman. Eleanor smiled. No, he won't. Barrett hadn't returned yet, but his shadow lingered in their minds, not as fear, but as readiness. Jude showed Eleanor how to handle the shotgun. She showed him how to stitch a wound without flinching. They were not playing at a fantasy, they were building a life. Autumn settled in, fully wrapping the land in gold and amber. The first frost came quietly whitening the edges of the lavender she'd planted behind the cabin. Jude built her a glass cover for the garden. "So the things you grow can make it through the cold," he said. She didn't reply with words. She kissed him. It wasn't a moment of fire. It was steadier than that, like lighting a lantern you plan to keep burning forever. That winter, storms rolled across the desert like slow thunder. The roads turned to clay, the winds howled, and the shop closed for weeks. But inside the cabin they cooked stew from dried beans, and venison played cards and read aloud from old books. Eleanor embroidered a quilt from leftover fabric, and Jude carved new hooks for the door. Neither of them spoke of loneliness anymore. It had become a stranger they no longer remembered how to welcome. Then, in February, word came that Silas Monroe had left town. Packed up in the middle of the night, abandoned his ranch and rode west. No goodbyes. Eleanor sat with the news for a long time. Not in grief, in reflection. "I used to think I needed a man like him to feel chosen," she told Jude. But being chosen isn't the same as being seen. Jude reached over and took her hand rough palm against her smaller one. "I see you, Eleanor Whitmore, not just who you were, who you are, and who you're still becoming." She turned to him, eyes shining. "Then, let me ask you something." He raised an eyebrow. "Would you let me choose you too?" His answer wasn't spoken. He stood, walked to the drawer, pulled out a velvet box with no ring, just the ribbon she still wore. He tied it gently around her wrist. "Already, have he said?" Spring came slow but certain. The lavender bloomed again. And somewhere between the cracked earth and the whispering grass, Eleanor Whitmore built a home, not out of desperation or shame, or half-spoken promises, but out of grit and grace, tea and timber honesty and laughter. Not every woman gets a second chapter. But those who do, they write it wild. And they write it true. Some stories aren't built from triumph, but from survival. From choosing dignity when shame is easier. From standing tall when the world tries to reduce you to silence. Eleanor Whitmore's journey is not one of fantasy, it is one of truth, of grit, of grace. It reminds us that a woman's worth is not measured by the youth in her skin, but by the resilience in her spirit. This tale is a tribute to all the women who have been told they were too old, too late, too much, or not enough. To every person who once stood on the edge of reinvention and dared to step forward anyway. Eleanor did not find love in grand gestures, but in shared silence, honest work, and the unshakable presence of someone who truly saw her. And through that she rediscovered herself. The lesson here is clear. It is never too late to be seen, never too late to choose yourself, and never, ever too late to begin again. Sometimes the strongest love stories are not about romance, but about reclaiming your place in the world with fire in your chest and truth in your hands. So, if you've ever felt forgotten, discarded, or invisible, remember Eleanor. Remember that lavender still grows through frost, and that second chances don't come wrapped in perfection. They come when you're ready to rise. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you feel less alone, then hit that subscribe button. Join our community of wild hearts and old souls as we continue to uncover the untamed, unforgettable stories of the Wild West. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling the tales that deserve to be heard. See you in the next story. Until then, stay wild.